Hey guys, happy holiday. I have Paula here in front of me. She came in today so that I could just do a quick info for her, but we have had a bad break, and I thought I would just quickly do a live demonstrating how I would fix this nail with Vogues and Lastik Plus Clear. So Lastik Plus Clear is basically a thicker a viscosity and harder curing version of normal Lastik, which means that unlike Sculpt, you can use this in exactly all the same ways that you would use Lastik Clear. It's been a little while since I've done a Vogue one, so it's going to be a bit of a recap for a lot of people, or if there's anybody watching that's never watched one of our lives, you'll see the full step-by-step process. So we've debulked this nail down to a very thin layer of Lastik on the nail, and we've cleaned up the break as best as we can. So we're basically working on a complete bare nail in essence. Like if you were to have the client come through and you debulk down to a thin layer and do a reapplication from there, that's where we're at the moment. Hello, Danielle. How are you? Happy holiday. So normally with Paula, we do short stiletto Vogues, but I find with her pinkies, I always struggle to find a good fit on the short stilettos. So with her pinkies, we tend to always go mediums and then I just adjust them. And I think this is a great video for me to demonstrate what I do and how I do that so that they match up with the other fingers. So you want to make sure that you're just sizing up the tip, making sure that it's fitting side to side. But what you'll notice is when I pop that on, that's considerably longer than what we have going on these fingers here. And I might see if I can zoom in for you guys. I'm always scared to zoom, sorry, because I'm scared I'll go out of frame, but I'll try my best to stay in frame. So what I do in a case like this, where I've selected a tip and I need it to replicate that length, instead of cutting it from the front, which then disturbs the pointy shape like stiletto, I tend to shorten them from the back. And so this is very handy because you're maintaining that pointy shape, you're not touching that at all, and it's just a faster way of doing it. So I just grab my clippers and I start by taking off quite a bit of length at the back, and I always do that. I don't know why I go in so close. And then I just go around the sides. And sorry, like I said, I'm going to try my very best to try and stay in frame. And we'll size it up. Like I like to keep an eye on what I'm doing so that I don't have to go and get a new tip. So every time I shorten it, I just make sure that I'm still on track to achieving what I want to achieve. So I'll cut a few times. And the more you do this, the better you get at it, the faster you get at it. So that actually looks fairly good if I just round it off a little bit. So it does take a little bit of practice, but it makes it so much easier, and then you don't have to worry about getting them all uniformed at the free edge. You're basically just doing cuticle work like you normally would, you know, customizing the cuticle area to fit. So that's fairly good. I'm fairly happy with that. I am going to maintain a gap at the back, so that's good. So now what you'll find is with the Vogue tips, they tend to be very thin at the cuticle area traditionally, and then they increase in thickness towards the apex, and then they maintain that thickness all the way down. So if you're cutting it from the back, you need to make sure that you're thinning this cuticle area out, and I like to do that before I adhere my tips, just because it makes blending the tips so much easier. So how I do that is I just use a hand file. I find that easiest. If you use an e-file, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure you're using a grinding bit and not a cutting bit. I place my file on the tip and I go in one direction. And so what this does is it thins it towards that cuticle area. So I'm maintaining the thickness in that area, but it'll go thinner and thinner at the cuticle or at that cutoff point. Whereas if you're filing back and forth, a lot of the times you won't get it thin at this point, but you might get it thinner in the middle, which is not really what you want. You just want that cuticle area or connection point to be as thin as possible. So file in one direction. And so hopefully now you'll be able to see how much thinner it is at that point. Have a look to see. Yeah, I'm fairly happy with that. Had no idea Plus existed. Is it only in a tub? And what's the difference to just Lastik? Okay, so Plus, we've had an overwhelming amount request for it to go into bottles, not just tubs. So we're working on sourcing bottles at the moment for it to go into a 15 ml bottle similar to your normal Lastik. So those ones. So that will come in future. It's a couple of months away at the moment. So at the moment it's only available in clear and in tubs, but we do have a few colors coming in this. So a few popular Lastik colors will be available in Plus. It's basically a thicker viscosity and a harder curing version of your normal Lastik. So it'll cure harder, which is really good for clients that need a little bit of additional strength over their Vogues. So you can maintain the same thickness, but it cures that a little bit harder. Because it's a thicker viscosity, it gives you a little bit more control. So it's great for like your infills when you're doing your Vogues. It's great for like your builder manis if you needed something that's a little bit thicker, or your builder and bottle manicures, just because the viscosity gives you a lot more control. And this self levels like you won't believe. Generally when I use it, I don't have to file afterwards at all. It's when you're doing it on natural nails, it just goes on beautifully. I mean, Lastik is amazing. It does that already. It's one of our favorites for that. But the self-leveling is very similar to Pug, which is something that I've always loved about Pug, but it's in a soak-off version. So it doesn't cure as hard as Pug. So it's kind of like between Lastik and Pug, but it's a soak-off, thicker viscosity, harder curing version. We used to have Sculpt, but the problem with Sculpt was it had less of the rubber base active ingredients in it, which meant that you couldn't use it exactly the same way you could with Lastik. Lastik is extremely forgiving, which means you'll have much less lifting issues. So like if you haven't properly etched your tip, your Lastik won't necessarily lift off of that. Whereas with Sticker Float or with Sculpt, if that tip is not properly prepped, you can have lifting issues. So Lastik is by far the easiest to use with our Vogue system, and it was something that we really wanted to bring out, a thicker viscosity of that in a harder curing version, and that's what Plus is. Sorry, I talk a lot, guys, so if you're new here, it's something you'll learn about me. So now when I do my Vogue extensions, I always leave a little gap at the cuticle area. This provides me with a few benefits. Firstly, it means that blending that tip down into the natural nail is so much easier. It gives me that beautiful transition when I go in and apply my gels over the top from the natural nail onto the product. So you don't have any ledges, you have a beautiful transition. It also means that you minimize lifting because you're making sure that your product's not touching your skin anywhere. And it just gives you a much better regrowth when the nail starts to grow out. So I will be maintaining a slight gap at the back. So if that's not something you've seen before, that's the reason why I do that. And other than that, I'm fairly happy with how that tip is sitting. I haven't removed Paula's cuticle, so I will do some cuticle work after I filed and blended. So I'm just going to grab my metal orange stick and push that skin back a little bit just to make sure that it's not in my way. And then once I've finished blending, I'll go in and just remove that. If I cut that cuticle away before I do all of that, there's a very big likelihood that I might cut her skin when I'm filing or blending around those bits. So that's the reason why that's still there. All right, now, This is something that up until now I've been very reluctant to say is something that you can do without any problems, because with Sculpt we've always had that you had to make 100% sure that you were mechanically etching the inside of the tip, followed by giving it a coat of sticky bond. But now that we have Lastik Plus, and Lastik Plus reacts exactly the same way as Lastik, this is a tip that I can give you. Because Lastik Plus has the same rubber actives in it than Lastik, you can now just grab your sticky bond and etch the inside of your tips using your sticky bond, as opposed to using your e-file. You obviously still can use your e-file. A lot of people prefer mechanical etching, but for those people that don't like the idea of the dust of mechanical etching, you can chemically etch with your sticky bond. What you need to do is what I'm doing now. You need to make sure that you're scrubbing it into the tip, because we want that sticky bond to etch the tip. So I hope you can see in the video there that it now has a slight texture to it. So obviously I filed that side, that's the etching that you see, but if you look at the shiny bits here, see how it's not smooth? That's what we're looking for. You still want to make sure that you etch past your connection point. That just means that if you have a little bit of spill and you're pulling it forward, that you won't encounter any problems. But Plus is a lot more forgiving than Sculpt or Sticker Float, so you have a little bit of wiggle room there, if I can put it that way. Sorry, I'm just reading the comments. So no need to acetone as it chemically etch. Look, I mean, it depends on how rough your client is with her nails. If you have clients that are really rough, you want to make sure that you're thoroughly etching the tip so that that gel adheres to it beautifully. Paula is actually the lovely lady that packs all of your orders. So if anybody ever wondered, Paula and Mel are the ones that's downstairs in our showroom that picks and packs all of our orders. So she is pretty rough on her hands, but we've been successfully using Plus on Paula's nails probably for about, is that 3 or 4 months now? Yeah, and we haven't had any issues. But like I said, if you have a client that's really rough on her hands, I would still mechanically etch, followed by a coat of sticky bond. If you have ladies that are less active using their hands, yes, just using sticky bond should be more than enough. Okay, so now what we're going to do is, this is prepped, ready to go. I'm just going to prep her natural nail. So like, we've prepped the natural nail, we've sanitized, we've applied a coat of nail prep. I'm just going to go in and apply a little bit of sticky bond to the back area, because there's a little bit of natural nail at the back that needs prepping. So just going to grab that. Am I still on frame? Sorry. And then we're going to go in and we're going to do a super thin coat of Plus as our base. So now, the thing that you need to bear in mind with, Annie says hello, Paula. The thing you need to bear in mind with Plus, you can use Plus exactly the same way you would use Lastik. But Plus does cure harder. So if you had a client that had super thin, super brittle nails, you might find using traditional Lastik as your base may still suit them a little bit better, followed by adhering with your Plus, or doing your building layer with your Plus, because it'll cure harder. So if they have really thin, brittle nails, and you use Plus, because that cures a little bit harder, you might have that flex differentiation. So just pay attention to that. But if you have somebody that have fairly good nails, so other than this nail being broken, Paula has fairly healthy, beautiful nails. So Plus would be perfectly fine to use as a base coat on her nails, which is what we're going to do now. So I just want to get a small amount on one side of my brush. Sorry, it's not going to focus. It's a very teensy tiny little small amount, and I'm just going to scrub that into the natural nail. Now, for everybody that generally uses the bottles, if you've ever struggled to get nice and close to the cuticle area, switching to a gel brush just for your base coat or for your wetting layer makes a huge difference, because you have more control of the amount of product that's on your brush, and it just makes that little bit easier to get nice and close to that cuticle area. Now, the reason why I'm scrubbing this into the nail is because we've had a break, this nail is a little bit more fragile than we normally would have. So I want to make sure that that base layer adheres beautifully to this nail. So once I've scrubbed that basic wetting layer in, I'm just going to add a little bit more gel so that I have a nice base. Now, Plus is a little bit thicker, so you'll see if you're scrubbing it, it'll look very uneven. But if you just give it a few seconds, you'll see it'll start to self-level beautifully, which is what this one's doing now. So we'll pop that in the lamp and cure that for 60 seconds. And sorry, on a live, 60 seconds is a long time. Oh, I shouldn't put that away. I will be using my new Miss Vogue Touch. It's on the way. We're waiting for them. So I do apologize. I don't really like doing that, showing you stuff that's not here yet, because I don't like showing off, but it's on the way. And we will have it we're hoping the next 2 to 3 weeks. So the moment they come, we will pop them on and they will be available. The Miss Vogue Touch works in the same concept as our old Miss Vogue, except that you can use touch to switch it on and off, and so I'll be using that today. We're nearly ready there. So we're going to go in and apply a little bit of Lastik Plus to the inside of the tip. We want to make sure that we're applying that to the same size more or less as that natural nail. The reason why I still do a thin little bit of gel on the inside of the tip, I don't just pop it in the cuticle area, is this acts as my wetting layer inside my tip, which guides my gel as to where it needs to flow when I've applied that tip. So if you don't have that, sometimes you can find that when your bubble's moving down, you might not get gel all the way down the sides of the nail, and then you can have surface breakdown when you're doing that. So very important to make sure that you're applying it to the whole inside of the tip where it's going to make contact. Then you can pop a little dollop in the cuticle area. Now, when you're using your flash cure lamps, make sure that you move your gel jar away so that you don't cure your gel in your jar. Alright, then when we're ready to apply, we're gonna just hold it that little bit away from the cuticle area. We're gonna push it down until that moves to where we need it to move, and then we're gonna flash. So Lastik Plus Clear is clear, obviously, so it flash cures in 10 seconds, same as your normal Lastik. If you were to use one of the colors like Ballet or Milky Way, you might find that you may need to flash cure it for that little bit longer. And so that is attached now. So see how I have that little bit of a gap at the cuticle area? This just means that when I go in to blend this, I'll have that beautiful, easy, there's more than enough space, so it'll be easy for me to blend that without any issues. And so I might just pop a little bit of top coat to the inside. Now again, because this nail broke so short, I might just use something like a detail brush to apply my top coat to the inside of that nail, because we want to be careful that we don't get any of the gel onto the skin. Sorry, and I'm just cleaning my detail brush, which I used earlier. Stain resistant. Alright, so I apply gel top coat to the inside of the tips for a few reasons. If you had any spill, this will help to remove well, basically seal in your wet elastic or your tacky layer from your elastic. But it also helps to just protect the inside of the tip from staining. It gives you a little bit of additional strength on the inside of the tip. So it's really handy to do that. So we have that in, so we'll just pop the hand. Because top coat is transparent and the tip's transparent, you can just pop the hand in normally for a 60-second cure. Do we have any questions at this stage? The next step is I'm just going to wipe off the tacky layer at the back, and then I'm going to blend it, and then I'll just do I'll just explain the difference between a bridging coat, a float coat, and why I would be choosing which one I'm using on my client, and then I might just sorry, I'm just grabbing a few things. I don't know if any of you've ever seen my office setup, but like I have my nail desk where I do nails, and I have my filming desk, and generally 9 times out of 10 everything's on my filming desk and not on my nail desk. So a lot of the times I just have to go and reach the stuff behind me. What are the differences between Sculpt and Plus? So Sculpt is now discontinued, firstly, so it's not available anymore. But Sculpt had more of an active, so compared to Lastik, we're not talking about compared to Plus just yet. Compared to Lastik, it had an active that cured harder, and it had a blue tinge to it that helped to prevent yellowing, and it contained less of the rubber base active that Lastik has in it. So Lastik is a combination between a rubber base gel and a builder in a bottle, and then Sculpt was a product that we brought out that cured harder, but had less of that rubber base in. So it had less flex and it cured much harder. Whereas Plus has a little bit more flex than Sculpt would have had, but it cures harder than Sculpt, if that makes sense. And it has all of those rubber benefits in it. So it's really just a harder curing and a thicker viscosity version of Lastik. So everything you cure harder, and it'll give you a little. I hope that answers your question. Okay, so I'm going to go in with my Vogue blending cone. So my Vogue blending cone is a cutting carbide bit. So I want to use it at high speed. This just helps me, helps it to glide nicely. If you're finding that your blending cone is digging into your product, you're probably using it too slow. So I have it on 35 on my brushless, and see how I'm turning Paula's hand so that I can get in at the angle that I need to get in, and that I have full control. So if you're scared because it's got such a sharp point, just work at how to hold your client's hand so that you have full control, and make sure that you're using it nice and flush with the product and that it never touches the natural nail, and you should be good. Now, because we left that little bit of a gap there, we do have product on the natural nail, so even if I were to accidentally touch the natural nail, the gel will protect it. All right, so I'm going to go in and just slice that connection point off. Okay, we can turn her hand back. Right, so that's blended. So now I'm just going to give it, I'm a buffer, so I like to just give it a slight buff and file, and I might just shorten that a little bit because I feel like it's a bit long. So I'm one of those techs that very old school. I like to work on a buffed surface. You can now just go in and give this a swipe with acetone, and then it's ready for your gel. But I personally just love working on a buffed surface, so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. I find because that's what I'm used to. I know exactly how my gel's going to respond or react when I do that. So now this, because we've used Plus, this nail is much harder than it would be, or much sturdier than it would be with Lastik, because it cures that little bit harder. So it's really good for clients that are a little bit harder on their hands, or require that little bit of additional strength. But so how I would determine whether or not my client needs a bridging coat, a float coat, an apex adjustment, is I would look at this nail, and when it's at the length where it needs to be at, I would apply pressure straight on, and I'll see where the nail turns white, and then I'll turn my hand to the side and see if that's where my gel is in my apex area, and if it is strong enough for this length. So if I turn it, push it, you'll see that it'll turn white in this area there. That means that that's the stress area, and that is where the bulk of our gel is, on the inside of that tip. So that's perfectly fine for this length on this client, taking her nail bed into consideration. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to do a bridging coat of my gel onto that surface. Now, a bridging coat is just exactly what it's called, because I've left that gap at the back between the cuticle and the extension. I just need to bridge that gap with a little bit of gel so that I'm sealing that tip in. And again, if that skin is in your way, grab your pusher, your metal orange stick, whichever you prefer to use, and make sure that you're pushing it up and away, out of the way, so that you have full control when you're using your product. I love those little sponge buffers. I feel like there's less waste. Oh yeah, they're amazing. Oh, and yeah, the grit on them are so good. I do love them too. Oh yeah, okay, I'm up to date. Alright, so I'm just going to take a little bit of gel on one side of my brush. I'm going to again just go in, go nice and close to my cuticle area, scrub it into the nail. Am I in frame? Yes. We're going to grab a little bit more gel. I'm going to place it in the back third, and I'm just going to float that and then drag it down. Now you don't need to do a full float. Just because I'm using my gel brush, I just need the gel to self-level a little bit. If you were using Lastik from the bottle, you would just be painting it basically with a little bit more gel on your brush. And then you just want to make sure that your gel is nice and level and that there's no bubbles anywhere where you need it. Oh, where you don't need the bubble. So the smoother you get this layer, the less you have to muck around with it later, so then you won't have to buff it or anything like that. So just give it a little bit of time to self-level. It'll take a little bit longer to self-level than your elastic because it's a thicker viscosity. And it's very dependent on the temperature in your room too. But once you're happy with that, you can pop that in the lamp and cure that for 60 seconds. This is where I'm going to love and leave you guys. The next step, we're just going to do a design for her. So I'll post a picture of that a little bit later so that you guys can see. But yeah, that's the basic steps that you would do when you're using Lastik Plus to do your Vogues. So basically exactly the same as your Lastik. I hope you found that helpful. And if you have any questions, I will be posting this. So please feel free to post them in the comments if you're not watching live. Happy holidays, guys, and we'll see you soon.